What's up, FloGrappling fans? Ricardo Amendolia here with another episode of the Baleia's Breakdown Show. And today I have a very, very special guest, a man who is a former MMA title contender, the current ADCC Legends Superfight champion, the promoter of Submission Underground, black belt under Fabiano Scherner, the father of modern combat trash talking, the one, the only, the American Gangster, Chael Sonnen. How are you?
What's going on, Ricardo? It's good to talk to you, buddy. Thanks for having me. Beautiful introduction, by the way. You know what? You might be the only person that gives me credit for being the Abu Dhabi Superfight champion because I am, and I feel like they took it from me. I never got an opportunity to defend it. I appreciate you giving me that due. Thank you.
I have to. You're undefeated and undisputed in ADCC, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me. I really appreciate it. I know you're a super busy guy, so we'll get right to it. Talking about ADCC, talking about Abu Dhabi. Chael, not a lot of people know this, but 20 years ago, you actually fought in the first ADCC in 2001. You flew to Abu Dhabi. That was your first Abu Dhabi experience. Can you tell me about the experience of going to Abu Dhabi back then? You weren't even really, started in MMA back then. Like, what was the focus of the matches for you? What was your game plan going into ADCC at that time? Can you tell me a little more about that?
The experience, awesome. I got an email. It was an invite. I accepted. I got an email back in like 20 minutes, and it was a plane ticket. I mean, that was it. It was as simple as that. All of a sudden, I'm going to Abu Dhabi. Now, I didn't even know where in the world that was. I thought it was Iraq. In fact, when I landed and I was there, I thought I was in Iraq. And I'd already graduated college, by the way. I mean, only by about 2 weeks. But geographically, I didn't know where we were. So that whole experience was great. Fortunately, I ended up out there with Jeff Munson, who was a longtime friend and teammate. But I hadn't talked to him. I didn't know that he was going. We ended up meeting each other in Amsterdam. Purely coincidence. We were headed to the same place. So now I at least got a friend. I at least have somebody to go through this experience with. And it was great. I mean, we got there. Bruce Buffer was announcing. We're in this beautiful auditorium where you couldn't come. There was no tickets for sale. There was like the sheik that put it on, and he was even sitting way up high. He didn't even come into the front row. And it was really a who's who. I was a big fan. And it had a major MMA feel to it back then. Like, I remember Mark Kerr being there, but he was already the smashing machine who I'd already watched on my television. And then some guys who went into MMA. Matt Serra rings a bell. Matt Serra did great in that event, and that's kind of what broke him into the UFC. So it was just really awesome. It was very fun to watch. It was a sport that I didn't fully understand. Even some of the rules were a little bit complicated. But, and I only say that because you asked me what was my strategy. I don't know that I had one. I would do it very differently if I could go back. I had never had a day of jiu-jitsu in my life back then. So as far as, what you're going to do once you get on top of somebody, or even manipulating some of the rules with, open for the first 10 minutes, points for the next 10. There were some things that I would have done very much different. But at that time, I was just looking to compete and get an experience in, and I definitely did.
Nice. And, looking back at, 20 years ago when you first fought at ADCC, and then fast forward to 2017, you did the super fight. And then even, 2019, I know you watched the ADCC at home. What's your opinion of the growth of ADCC and kind of submission grappling in general? And where do you kind of see it going in the future?
Man, I'm such a fan. As far as the growth, I like how they stuck to their rules. I like that they have their own rule set. I also feel that those referees and judges are very good at enforcing and implying the interpretations. And they get us all together. They tell us the rules ahead of time. There's always a bunch of questions that goes up. There's always people that wish the rules were different. But whatever they are, they stick to them. And I like that. I think that people deserve credit for that. And it used to be every 4 years, just to remind you. They sped it up to every 2 years, which was great. I hope it gets to where it's every single year. There's a lot that goes into it. And I can tell you, you've organized grappling events, and I organize grappling events, and sometimes it's hard to get the top guys to take each other on. Within their own minds, if one of them gets beat, now their seminar is not worth as much, or they could lose students. And that might well be true. I've never gone into that side of it, but I can't relate to it. In wrestling, you were looking to get beat. You would get on an airplane and fly across the country if you thought somebody was there that was good enough to beat you. You use it as a learning experience. And so for the grapplers, it's tough. And I only bring that in because it's not for Abu Dhabi. Everybody comes out of the woodwork. Nobody says no. Not a big negotiation. There's so much respect behind it. There's so much clout within the community that whether you're ready or you're not ready, when Abu Dhabi comes around, if you can get a shot, you step on the scale and you enter the bracket. I love that about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Let's cut right to it. Let's watch your last match at ADCC. You're going against Leo Vieira. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be honest with you, Chael. Leo Vieira, this is my hero growing up in jiu-jitsu. And, this reminded me of Leo Vieira against Mark Kerr. You were the bigger wrestler going against Leo Vieira. So I was excited as a fan to see how this played out. But I want to hear your insight into this match. So did you know much about Leo going into this match? And, talk us through it. If you want to roll it.
Sure. I've never got to see this before. All right. Here's Chael with no shirt. Leo's got the shirt. I had a pretty good plan at this point. I wasn't a black belt yet, but I spent enough time in the room in these positions. And there's also a part of jiu-jitsu that's very true. If you know that you're outmatched, there's like what some people will call it the anti jiu-jitsu, pushing on the ankles, pushing on the chin. It's hard to do in this kind of environment where you have 20 minutes, but it will buy you a moment here and it'll buy you a moment there. And this was very tight. I thought he should have got more credit for this. When the end of the match came, this was as close as we were to a catch, to any kind of a submission as we had, and it was in his favor. Now, this wasn't overly tight, but he's still to a more advantageous or dangerous position than the rest of the match saw. I did a good job of staying on top and controlling him. But again, when I talk about, you can usually feel early on if you're overmatched skill for skill. And even if I'm larger, you still got to kind of know how to use that weight. You got to know how to control the hips, not let them slip aside. And then even here's part of the strategy, to disengage completely. If you disengage too much, it can look bad. The audience isn't going to enjoy it. You're not going to feel good about yourself. If you disengage as a reset and then come back down, that would fall more into that category of anti-jiu-jitsu. And I can just tell you again as a wrestler, but if you wrestle a guy who doesn't wrestle you back, it's very hard to do. And so the sport of wrestling's put rules in, such as stalling. If one guy backs up or the guy doesn't engage, jiu-jitsu didn't, or at least by Abu Dhabi rules, didn't totally have that formed. So this anti-jiu-jitsu, as I'm putting it, was still effective at this time to at least elong the match. Sooner or later, I'm going to get caught. The question is it going to be before the clock goes out? And in this case, we're able to get some minutes.
Well, what I liked, what you were doing in this match, reviewing it again this morning. Look at that little spin there, Chael. But one of the things I liked what you were doing in this match, like you said earlier, you were disengaging enough not to get penalized, but then coming back in. Was that sort of the strategy to sort of try to frustrate Leo and maybe get him to open up his guard a little bit and look for an opportunity to pass? Or, can you tell me a little bit about that?
I can tell you my number one thought by doing it is I could generally lull somebody, and again, this comes from the practice room, but I can generally lull somebody into a position for 30 or 40 seconds as they're doing something to set me up. And once I learn that rhythm, what a guy needs, what he does before, what his tendencies are, every time I would disengage, I come back, we just reset that clock. So now I'm playing the same 30 to 40 second game. I disengage, I come back in. He's got to push me, try to get my arm, bring his hips inside. He had his own rhythm that was designed to set things up. And every time I disengage, he's now got to start that over. And that's largely what I was doing. I would have loved to have passed. I think with what I know now, that I've spent even more time in the jiu-jitsu room, spent more time understanding these rules, I think I could have got to more advantageous positions, maybe even looked for a submission of my own. But this very much was, all right, I'm bigger than you. I believe I'm in better shape than you. And that was really what my strategy was. If I stay in a good position above you and I don't tap out, I'm going to win this match. Now, whether I'm right or wrong, but that was my thought going in. Survive this, stay on top.
Yeah, I gotta admit, like, looking at everyone in the jiu-jitsu community, they were definitely saying, "Oh, Leo's gonna beat Chael. He's gonna submit Chael, so forth." But you stuck to that strategy. It worked. It was effective. You were able to nullify a lot of techniques. Did you do much tape study on Leo Vieira, or were you kind of just playing in the moment there?
I watched as much as I could. He took on, there's two brothers that are well known in California. I think it's like the Mendez brothers, and he wrestled one of them. I was at an Abu Dhabi with Leo in 2003. That was the year that Eddie Bravo upset Hoyler. But then Eddie got whipped. Somebody beat Eddie by like 12 points. Well, it was this guy.
Leo did.
It was
Leo. Yeah.
Yeah. So even though I hadn't studied Leo and wasn't familiar with him at the time, I knew about him. I knew enough about him. I did MMA a lot, but a lot of the MMA guys were trained by Leo. They all admired Leo, talked about how great he was, that he would come in the room and help them. I don't know if I'm right on this or not, but I don't know if Leo was real active leading into this match. I hadn't found a whole bunch of matches that he had. I believe I was supposed to take on Frank Mir, and then I was supposed to take on Laborio, or vice versa. In fact, it was Laborio, and then it went to Frank Mir, and Leo got a call. He was kind of like a last-minute replacement. So whether he was prepared or not, in my own mind, I convinced myself he wasn't. The longer the match goes, I can hold up, and he'll have a harder time.
Yeah, Leo actually took a few years off competition, so he hadn't really competed that long, but he has a huge legacy at ADCC as well. And I remember that. I remember they were reaching out to Frank Shamrock, I think, Dan Henderson. They were trying to get somebody to come in and go against you. Originally, it was supposed to be Laborio, like you said. But, how cool was it to be there in Finland? And what was the big difference of being on that mat in Finland compared to Abu Dhabi maybe 20 years before?
I loved it. So the one big difference with Finland, and by the way, I got to give myself some credit here, Ricardo. You'll see I keep reaching down and pulling his ankles off. But when I first started to learn about jiu-jitsu and competition for it, I was getting ready for a match with Galbo. And Fabiano Schurter made a big deal about that. Look, you're not going to be better at jiu-jitsu than him, but if you can just there's ways to get closer to the time limit. That was a Metamoris match. It was also 20 minutes. And pulling those ankles up was a big deal. Every time he gets set, just make him reset. 1 second at a time, 1 second at a time. So I was pretty disciplined to do that. I keep pulling his ankles up. Sometimes I'll even push him into the mat. It's not going to get me anywhere, but it'll cause a reset. He's got to get it free. He's got to come back to the hip. So I'm just noticing some of that. Finland was great because they allowed the crowd in. And the crowd was packed. You might recall, I can't think of her name, but it was a Finnish girl. And in the very opening round, she got like a knee bar. Remember that girl? She wore the tights, but she was a
Vieira.
hometown favorite. Yep. Yes, and she got a big upset in the very first round. The crowd went crazy for it. And I remember thinking on this. I mean, in hindsight, I don't know what I was thinking, but I thought this would work. I thought what I just did, take a guy down, hold him there. I thought I was going to win the absolute. I was looking at the absolute. I saw that Gordon Ryan was in there, and I knew I can get on top of this guy, and I could keep him here. And I went the very first round with Craig Jones. And, I mean, it was just a different experience. Like, the level of jiu-jitsu that exists at Abu Dhabi, I did not know existed anywhere. I didn't even know guys could be that good. And I remember getting that lesson from Craig Jones. It was a very different style. It was based a lot on flexibility, pull guard, or even half guard. And I'm thinking that's a fool. Only a fool would sit down and want to be on his back. Some of the top guys want to be there. Moreover, they want to be in half guard than they do in full guard. But it was a level. It was a level to this sport that I didn't even know existed, let alone was prepared to defeat.
Absolutely. I have to shift focus here a little bit. It's something that I've always wanted to ask you. I believe they say breaking down the fourth wall in wrestling terms, but I want to talk a little bit about, you in your mixed martial arts career. I don't want to focus too much on that career, but you becoming a personality kind of turning heel. And we're starting to see that a lot in professional grappling. You mentioned Gordon Ryan, trolling people and just going off on people. Can you tell me a little bit about that and, why you felt it was necessary to do it at that time? And do you see any of that going on in submission grappling and pro grappling? And what are some of these guys doing right and what are they doing wrong, Chael? Because if anyone's going to tell them what to do, it's got to be the man who invented it.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I never knew if I changed for the camera, if the camera had finally found me. I wrestled in college, and it was very hard to get an interview. It was very hard for anybody, even our local paper, to want to cover the wrestling team. But my interviews were so over the top back then that I got put on the banned list. The coach pulled me, said, hey, no, you can no longer do the interviews. And I remember trying to tell the coach, no, coach, this is going to bring people in. And I was calling guys out, or I was insulting entire programs. And I wasn't doing it for attention. This is how I felt about it. If you want to do something about it, come answer for it. I was never doing it to bring people or to sell tickets. Some of it was to put myself in the right frame of mind. And some of it's because this is how I really felt about the guy. I only share that with you because I think that some of that hype is a very good thing. But I
Yeah.
do see guys where it looks canned or it looks scripted, because it is canned, it is scripted, and that stuff's not going to get over the same. I think that Gordon Ryan, by example, who speaks up all the time, but he's very consistent. You might think that he's a dick, but he's very consistent with it. And I think that therefore there's an authenticness and there's a realness. And I would always encourage people to be themselves. An example that gets thrown out is to be yourself with the volume up. But there's a lot of truth to that. If you really want to compete with somebody, and I can tell you some of my bigger frustrations as a fan is when two guys did that. They had the back and forth, and the second the match is over, one of them grabs the mic and says, "Oh, this was all for hype." I remember Josh did that against George St. Pierre, or Mike Tyson did it against Lennox Lewis. And I remember thinking, as the consumer, then you owe me my money back. That's fraud.
Yeah, you got gypped.
You frauded me into buying this. So if it's real and you're a real competitor, I think that that's just as refreshing as the guy that comes out and tries to bow and be polite to your face. But he'll put a knife in your back as soon as you turn around. I don't see any honor in that. I disagree with people where they talk about, well, this is honor and sportsmanship and it's about respect. I don't see an honor in bowing to someone's face. If you're going to trash talk them as soon as they turn around, do it right to their face. Get some people in there, put it all on the line, live with the result. Maybe you'll be a hero, maybe you'll be embarrassed, but have the balls to do it.
Yeah, and I think it's just like you said, I think people have to understand that there is a time, there is a place for it. You need to do that. It needs to be natural. Some guys try to do it and it comes off very disingenuous. They just come off looking like dicks. And it's, at the end of the day too, you can't be lazy with that stuff. You can't be lazy playing that guy. You got to stay active on social media. You got to be calculated. And you got to win. One of the things you were good at is you played the role, but you won matches. And I think some guys try it, they lose, and then they come off looking like dorks. So
sure.
Thanks for the lesson there. But sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'll just add to what you're saying, Ricardo, because you're absolutely right, and that's what stops most people in the first place. I mean, you do put yourself in a vulnerable spot. If you go out and you bring in a whole bunch of attention, and you promise you're going to go do something, and you don't do it, you do look like a fool. And that's not breaking news. People know that. So ahead of time, they get intimidated. They don't want to take that big risk and they don't do it. I mean, there is a real honor. There is a real courage in putting yourself in that spot, making sure that people are tuning in and trying to back up what you said. And I've been on both sides of it. It's very real. You can come out looking like a hero and you can come out looking like a doofus. But the people that took the courage in the first place, I think they deserve some level of credit. You're certainly right that if you're winning, it's a little bit easier. It'll keep that ball going. But there's a courage either way. To be Babe Ruth, to walk on the mound and say where you're going to put the ball, whether you put it there or not, there was a courage.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chael, I got to ask you something. There's a little bit of discussion online today that I saw, mostly in the grappling community. I guess there's a big no-gi tournament happening in Tokyo in Japan right now called the Olympics. I've never heard of it, but how likely is it that you think we'll see jiu-jitsu or grappling in the Olympic Games? And do you think it's necessary? Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing? A lot of jiu-jitsu traditionalists are saying they never want to see jiu-jitsu in the Olympics. I, for one, think that no-gi submission grappling deserves a spot there one day, so that way we can stay away from the politics of like belt ranks and all these different things. But wanted to hear your opinion on that.
Well, there's nothing that adds validity to your sport being a sport like the Olympics. As soon as you're introduced into the Olympics, the gig is up. You're no longer on the fringe. You're no longer a niche. You are a sport. I lived through that as a wrestler, but it was women's wrestling. They inducted and adopted women's wrestling in 2004, but there was nothing that made the sport more viable than being recognized by the IOC. So there's a lot of people that say they don't want it there. None of them mean that, right? That's just things that they say. Of course, we would like to be in the Olympics. No, I do not think we're going to be there in my lifetime. But that's because we don't have leadership. Like every sport that's there, and it wouldn't matter if it's ping pong. They have leadership, and the grappling does not. Even Abu Dhabi, which you and I love, if you can only go once every 2 years, you're not very goddamn good at what you do. Secondly, every time I turn the channel on to watch grappling, there's different rules. The reason we can't end up on Sports Center or talked about by Jim Rome or get in the Olympics or anywhere else is because we can't even agree on a rule set. If you watch with the volume off a basketball game, you know that a basket is worth 2 points. You know that a free throw is worth 1 point. You know if you're outside of the 3 point, I mean, it's all the same. It doesn't matter if you're junior high, boys, girls, college, little league. It's all the same. In jiu-jitsu, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I give Gordon a hard time. I respect Gordon tremendously for his skills, but he is the only guy in the world who is the best in the world at his craft, and he's the champion of nothing. And you can't claim Abu Dhabi. I love Abu Dhabi too. If it's once every 2 years, it's not real. So he's the only guy that I know that's the best in his craft by a lot. He's the champion of nothing. And every time he becomes the champion of some organization and they change the rules for him, nobody's buying a ticket, which is why they go out of business. So now he's the champion again of nothing. If you're the best, you've got to have a way to prove it. And you can't prove anything if you don't have a competitive architecture, which is another beautiful thing about Abu Dhabi. It's a bracket. Everybody understands a bracket. There's so much politics. Boxing's guilty, MMA's guilty, and jiu-jitsu now is guilty of just bringing matches in that people want to see. And to keep the lights on, I'm part of the problem. That's something that you have to do. But if you want to be a real sport, you have a competitive architecture, you let people stand on their own. And if we as leadership cannot come up with one rule set, we are not one step closer to being recognized, whether it's the sports centers or the top sports shows or the International Olympic Committee or the NCAA. We don't even have a goddamn rule set. Every time you get a new promoter, if I may go off, every time you get a new promoter, the first thing he has to do before he even puts his poster out and loses all of his money and goes bust is he's got to come up with his rules. It never changes. Like, that ego can never get above anybody. He has to come up with his rules. Then he gets a top draw like a Gordon, and then he's going to change his rules for that guy. Well, it's not a sport now. Ricardo, you change one rule, you've now changed the sport. You change one rule, you change one time period, you change one stanza, you ban heel hooks. You've now changed the sport. It's step number one, brother. And you and I are 20 years away from anybody to come in with deep enough pockets and enough organization to change this. Abu Dhabi could do it.
I got to ask you though, you're a guy that you've done grappling, you've done MMA, you've done analyzing, you've done it all. What do you think about this whole like YouTuber movement that's happening in boxing and some of these other sports? Do you think grappling needs to kind of touch that a little bit, or what else can grappling do aside from a unified rule set to kind of transcend as a sport?
Well, that wouldn't hurt things. I mean, I think this whole entertainment or, the ridiculousness, I'm in for it. I think you're probably going to get another year out of it. I think where you can bring in some big celebrities that want to go out there. And I'm not positive that the rules matter. I'm not positive they weren't arm wrestling, it wouldn't do just as well. I'm not positive they weren't baking a cake, it would do just. If you have two people that are interesting, that you're interested in, I'm not sure they have to be punching each other with lefts and right hands. I think that should be a lesson. And I think if we learn that lesson, we then could make it some rules or some skill sets that people would be more interested in coming to. I do think that pertains into grappling. We had word that Shaquille O'Neal wanted to do this. So we tried to make a Shaquille O'Neal versus George St. Pierre match. And we never could agree on the date, and things got weird. But I'm just offering for you that while I do pass judgment, while that isn't the best against the best, I'm not above doing it. If somebody can bring attention in and somebody can get you on Sports Center, I think that you owe it to the sport to go and book those matches. And we have a lot of very famous people that do jiu-jitsu. I went to a Metamoris event. I don't know if it was the first one, but where Cyborg took on Brendan Schaub. Remember where Brendan backed away? You remember this one? But man, I could name drop for an hour the people that I saw there. The Sons of Anarchy were there, and Al Bundy was there, and the Khan brother and father were there. I mean, we had some really meaningful names that do go and play with this sport that I've always wondered, well, how come you guys don't participate? How come there isn't some match built up? And I think that if there's anything we're going to get from the YouTubers in the boxing, it is maybe that, hey, there's ways to go out and compete. There's ways to go out and do your craft. It can bring in a lot of attention. I think those are all positives.
Nice. Okay. Chael, I know you're on a bit of a tight time length here. I want to ask you one last thing. We're talking about ADCC. We talked about Abu Dhabi and, the World Championship coming up September 2022. Are you game for a super fight? Are you down to defend your title? And if so, who would you like to defend it against?
I'm absolutely down. I thought it was owed to me. In all fairness, I thought that I was owed. I thought if you were the super fight champion, that you are guaranteed a match. I wouldn't care who the opponent was in terms of I would never say no to anybody. I've always wanted a shot at Galbo. I took Galbo on 8 weeks' notice. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know what it was. I mean, I got a lot of excuses, but in all fairness, I was a purple belt. I've always thought, what would happen? What would happen if I knew what I know now and I got to go against Andre Galvao? I thought it was very competitive the day that we did go. I'd like to be able to do it again. I think he's booked. Did Galvao ever get an opponent? I know we all wanted Galvao and Gordon, but then Gordon is faking an injury in conjunction with being signed with ONE FC. Like what happened there? Did Pena set up, or does Galvao have an opponent?
He has an opponent right now. It's Gordon Ryan, as long, pending Gordon's health condition. So as far as I know, Gordon has committed to it. If his health condition allows him, he's in. But they haven't named anyone else. But apparently, it's going to be Gordon. So let's say Andre is not an option here. Anyone else? Sure. I know you challenged for Doom at one point. Would that be a name that maybe you could go against?
Definitely. I would truly defend against anybody. Look, I hate this. If somebody does a call out and they say, I don't care who the opponent is, how can the audience? If I don't care, how can the audience? I mean it purely from a perspective that I would put that title up against anyone. I really did think that it was owed to me. I was kind of waiting for my phone to ring. Go, wait, I'm the Superfight champion. Why am I not being offered this? I don't have an answer for you there. That's great news that you just shared. I did not know that Galvao and Gordon. I thought that Gordon, with the ONE FC contract, was precluding him from that match. What you just told me broke news to me. I love that. I would love to see that. As far as I go, look, I don't think Chael's going to be there, but yes, I would. To answer your question, they can pick the opponent. I love that Gordon's taking on Galvao, though, man. I hope that thing comes around.
Yeah, what's your prediction if that does happen? Before we go, how do you think that's going to roll out?
I would predict Andre. I think that it would be a point system. Would also depend where Andre's at. I thought the Andre Galvao that defended at the last Abu Dhabi was the best Andre Galvao. The way he pushed the pace, particularly in the overtime. There's some guys that are trying to win, but there's some guys that just refuse to lose. And Andre just had that eye of the tiger. I think that Andre is going to get to position. The question is, can he stay there? Gordon's very good at going below the waist. I mean, I'm very compelled by the match, but I have seen Gordon in some of these, no time limit. Kyle Bain comes to mind as an example, where guys are able to get some minutes with him. Guys are able to learn some of those positions. I think somebody as good as Galvao, that don't forget, the winner isn't always based on who's better. It's also who can maintain better position in the time period. It's close. I'm not bullish. I don't know that I'd bet so much as $1. I lean towards Galvao.
All right, guys, you heard it there. Chael's leaning towards Galvao. We hope to see it happen. I hope to see Chael Sonnen back at ADCC. I'm going to shoot a text to Mo Jassim after this call. Chael, thank you so much, brother. I appreciate it. It's always fun talking to you. Hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Ricardo, I missed you. Thank you, pal. Talk soon.
All right, guys. I'll see you next week on another episode of Baleia's Breakdown. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Oh, beautiful high cross. Oh, the crowd love it.